Chapter 2. How Forex Started. In this chapter, back in Babylon, agreeing at Bretton Woods, Smithsonian settlements, monetary system in Europe, Forex today. The foreign exchange market, as we know it today, is relatively new. It was started just over 35 years ago in 1973. But, of course, money has been around a lot longer than that. In this chapter, we review how money got started and how the current foreign exchange market developed. Beginnings in Babylon. You must travel all the way back to the ancient kingdom of Hammurabi, 3rd century BCE, in Babylon to find the origins of banking. In those days, the royal palaces and temples served as secure places for the safekeeping of grains and other commodities. People who deposited their commodities in the palaces and temples were given receipts that they could use to claim their commodities at a later date or give to others in payment for something else. These bills became the first known form of money. Egypt also started a similar system of banking, providing state warehouses for the centralization of harvests. The written order that depositories received were used to pay debts to others, including tax gatherers, priests, and traders. Prior to these systems of deposits and receipts, the barter of goods was the primary way a person paid for goods and services. Egypt moved from these paper notes to introduce the first coins. The earliest countable metallic money was made of bronze or copper from China. Other objects used for coins were spades, hoes, and knives, also known as tool currencies. The ancient Greeks during the time of Julius Caesar used iron nails as coins. When people engaged in foreign exchange, which was primarily in connection with military activities, the primary currencies used in trade were precious metals. Initially, precious metals were traded by weight, but a gradual transition was made from weight to quantity. During the Middle Ages, the need arose for a currency other than coins or precious metals. Middle Eastern money changers were the first to use paper currency rather than coins for trade. These paper bills represented transferable third-party payments of funds. They gradually became more accepted in foreign currency exchange trading, which made life much easier for merchants and traders. Regional currencies began to flourish. From the Middle Ages to World War I, the foreign exchange markets were relatively stable. Not much speculative activity occurred. After World War I, however, the world of money changed. The foreign exchange markets became volatile and speculative activity increased tenfold. Speculation in the foreign exchange market was not looked on as favorable by most institutions or the general public. The Great Depression of 1929 slowed the speculative fever considerably. The dominant world currency before World War II was the British pound. In fact, the British pound got the nickname cable because the U.S. dollar was originally compared against it. And the U.S. dollar and the British pound were the first currencies traded by telegraphic cable. The British pound lost its set at the top of the currency world during World War II because Germany launched a massive counterfeiting campaign to destroy the power of the pound. All confidence in the pound was lost during World War II. The U.S. dollar, which was in disgrace since the market crash of 1929, emerged from World War II as the currency of choice, which it still is today. The U.S. dollar remains the favorite currency for most foreign exchanges. The U.S. economy boomed after World War II, and the United States emerged as a world economic power. The other big advantage of the United States was that it was one of the few countries that hadn't felt the ravages of war on its own shores, so its massive infrastructure was still intact. The Bretton Woods Accord. After the war, the world's economy was in tatters. Something needed to be done to design a new global economic order and put all the pieces of the global economy back together. The United Nations Monetary Fund convened a global monetary and financial conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, with representatives from the United States, Great Britain, and France, as well as 730 delegates from all 44 allied nations to design a new global economic order. The Allies decided to hold the conference in the United States because it was the only suitable place that wasn't destroyed by the war. The conference ended with the Bretton Woods Accord, which established a system of international monetary management with rules for commercial and financial relations among the world's major industrial nations. The delegates hammered out the accord during the first their weeks of July 1944. As part of the system of rules and procedures to regulate the international monetary system, the Bretton Woods Accord also established two key institutions: the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which became operational in 1946 after a sufficient number of countries ratified the agreement. The U.S. dollar emerged from Bretton Woods as the world's benchmark currency. It became the currency against which all other nations would measure their own currencies as they struggled to rebuild their economies. Definition: the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, known as IBRD, initially served as a vehicle for the reconstruction of Europe and Japan after World War II. Today, it fosters economic growth in developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, as well as the post-socialist states of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. The International Monetary Fund, also known as IMF, oversees the global financial system. It monitors exchange rates and balance of payments for foreign exchange transactions and provides technical and financial assistance when requested by individual member countries. The gold standard. One of the chief features of the new Bretton Woods system of foreign exchange was an obligation for each country to adopt a monetary policy that pegged the value of their currency to the U.S. dollar. The price of the U.S. dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce, which became known as the gold standard. Each country had to maintain its currency within a fixed value, plus or minus 1%, in terms of its peg to the U.S. dollar. This is known as a fixed exchange rate. The IMF was given the ability to bridge temporary imbalances of payments. The central bank of each country was required to intervene in the foreign exchange market if its country's exchange rate fluctuated more than 1% in either direction. The agreement initially served to bring stability to other countries and the global foreign exchange market. It succeeded in reestablishing stability in Europe and Japan. Until the 1970s, the Bretton Woods system helped to control economic conflict and achieve the goals set by the leading countries involved, especially the United States. Definition: a fixed exchange rate is a type of exchange rate regimen in which a currency's value is matched to the value of an individual country's currency or a basket of other countries' currencies. Initially, this system worked well and helped to fuel the world's economic growth. But the system eventually fell under its own weight as more and more countries converted their dollars to gold. The U.S. gold reserves dwindled. Pressure started to build up the gold peg. An attempt to ease the problem started in 1968 when a new system called Special Drawing Rights, SDR, was established. Dollar exchange between banks was done using SDRs and was managed by the International Monetary Fund. Countries were encouraged to hold dollars rather than convert those dollars to gold. By 1971, the United States had enough gold to cover only about 22% of its reserve obligations. There was no way the United States could cover the paper dollars at the exchange rate of $35 per ounce of gold, as set by the Bretton Woods Accord. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon single-handedly closed the gold window and made the dollar inconvertible to gold directly, except on the open market. Removing the United States' need to balance the value of the dollar to the value of gold held in its reserves. He made this decision without consulting with other members of the international monetary system and even without talking to the State Department. Currency coin. Today, the gold held by the United States is held at the U.S. Mint in Fort Knox, Kentucky. The gold depository opened in 1937, and the first gold was deposited there in January of that year. The highest gold holdings for the United States were in December 1941, when 649.6 million ounces were on deposit. Today, only 147.4 million troy ounces are left. Gold is held as an asset of the United States as a book value of $42.22 per ounce, or $6.2 billion total. But the market price of gold in December 2010 was $1,384.50 per ounce. Nixon's shocking move killed the Bretton Woods Accord and threw the entire world monetary system into shock. After the shock wore off, the United States led the efforts to develop a new system of international monetary management. During the next several months, the United States held a series of multilateral and bilateral negotiations with other countries, known as the Group of 10, to try to develop the new system. Participating countries were Belgium, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Today, the Group of 10 still exists, but Japan has joined its ranks, bringing the total to 11 countries, although it is still called the Group of 10. The Smithsonian Agreement. In December 1971, the Group of 10 met the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and created the Smithsonian Agreement, which devalued the dollar to $38 per ounce, with trading allowed up to 2.25% above or below that value. Dollars could not be used to convert directly to gold. Instead, the Group of 10 officially adopted the SDR system, and the IMF held the responsibility of keeping the system in balance. The United States continued its deficit spending, and the value of the U.S. dollar continued to fall. Gold's value began floating on the international markets, and its value gradually edged up to $44.20 per ounce in 1971, and $70.30 per ounce in 1972. Countries abandoned any peg to the U.S. dollar and let their currencies float. By 1976, all the developed country currencies were floating, and exchange rates were no longer the primary way governments administered monetary policy. Definition. A floating exchange rate is an exchange rate regimen in which the value of a currency fluctuates according to the foreign exchange market. Instead of being pegged to a specific commodity, such as gold, or a specific currency, as under the Bretton Woods system where currencies were pegged to the US dollar. Today, the currencies of developed countries float, but many of the emerging countries still peg the value of their currency to the US dollar or to a basket of currencies from a number of countries. In Chapter 6, we discuss the key emerging countries, many of which use some type of fixed rate regimen. The European monetary system. At about the same time as the Smithsonian Agreement, European countries established a European joint float. The nations that joined this system included West Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The basic system was close to the exchange rate regimen established at Bretton Woods. The European joint float fell at about the same time as the Smithsonian Agreement, but the decision among the Europeans to work together economically remained in place. The European countries began working together officially in 1957, long before the European joint float, under a treaty that formed the European Economic Community. When the European joint float fell, the European nations worked together to form the European Monetary System, also known as the EMS. In 1979, which included most of the nations of today's European Union. The goal of the EMS was to establish foreign exchange and counter inflation among the members of the EMS. Periodic adjustments raised the value of the currencies whose economics were strong and lowered the value of the weaker ones. By 1986, a similar system based on national interest rates was used to manage the currency value. By the early 1990s, the EMS started to show strains, specifically and especially after Germany was reunited. Many European countries had very different economic policies and faced varied economic conditions. Great Britain permanently withdrew from the EMS in 1991. The EMS began efforts in the 1990s to establish a common currency in Europe. Its first step was to create the European Central Bank in 1994. By 1998, the bank responsible for setting a single monetary policy and interest rate for the nations that chose to participate. At the same time as the European countries moved to coordinate currency exchange, they also worked toward political and defense corporations. The European Union, also known as EU, was formed in 1992 with the Treaty of Maastricht. By 1998, the first member of the European central banks were Austria, Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. All cut their interest rates to a nearly uniform low level with the hope that this would promote the growth and prepare for the unified currency. In 1999, the unified currency, the euro, was adopted by these countries. Euro coins and notes did not begin to circulate until January 2002. Within 2 months, local currencies were no longer accepted as legal tender within the countries that had adopted the euro. Great Britain is not the only European nation that has decided not to adopt the euro. Denmark and Sweden also decided to maintain their currencies. Citizens of all 3 countries opposed the adoption of the euro. Of the countries that joined the EU since the fall of the Soviet Union, only Slovenia have adopted the euro, but several others are working to meet the economic requirements to do so. Countries must meet strict economic guidelines before becoming parts of the EMS and adopting the euro. These requirements set limits on allowable government deficits and interest rates. Today's foreign exchange markets. Today's systems of floating exchange rates were not carefully planned. It was one born by default as the Smithsonian Agreement and the European joint float failed to gain momentum. Yet the foreign exchange market is by far the largest and most liquid market in the world today. The floating system allows the values of currencies to rise and fall based on the basic laws of supply and demand. When the supply of a particular currency is high, the price, the relative exchange rate of the currency begins to drop because there is more supply than demand. The opposite is true when the supply of a currency is tight. When less money is available for trade, the relative exchange rate of the currency goes up because people want more of the currency than is available for purchase. You learn more about the principles of supply and demand in Chapter 4. Major currencies today move independently from other currencies. They can now be traded by anyone from individual retail investors to large central banks. Central banks do intervene occasionally to influence the exchange rate for their country's currency. What are the key developments that made the foreign exchange market so vibrant and liquid? These developments include the following. The flexibility countries have today to choose either a floating exchange rate or a fixed exchange rate. Financial deregulation moves throughout the world that included elimination of government controls and restrictions on foreign exchange in nearly all countries. This permits greater freedom from national and international financial transactions and greatly increases global competition among financial institutions. Internalization of savings and investment provides fund managers and institutions around the globe with large sums available for investing and diversifying across country borders to maximize returns. Broader trends towards international trade liberation within a framework of multilateral trade agreements encourage the globalization of business. Major technological advances have led to rapid and reliable execution of financial transactions, to reduce costs, and to instantaneous real-time transmissions of vast amounts of market information worldwide. The least you need to know. There are two types of currency exchange regimens: fixed rates and floating. The developed countries all use a floating exchange rate. Many emerging countries use a fixed exchange rate, most often pegged to the US dollar or a basket of currencies. Although the Bretton Woods Accord and its fixed exchange rate regimen helped to rebuild the world economic after World War II, it ultimately failed. The euro, the unified currency of Europe, was first adopted in 1999 and is rapidly becoming a key currency in the Forex marketplace. Today, the foreign exchange market is by far the largest and most liquid financial market in the world. Chapter 3. Understanding Money Jargon.